Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining ETAuto webinar. Today's is a very special webinar, and we can understand, looking at the situation, we are in a crisis situation, and we need a very exalted speaker to make us understand how to steer ahead in such a difficult time. For this, we have brought in Mr. Wilfried Aulbur, senior partner at Roland Berger, driving the firm's global commercial vehicle construction equipment and agriculture business. He is also responsible for operational performance improvement and technology strategy. He is also a professor at Harvard Business Publishing, and he is also the author of an acclaimed book called Riding the Tiger. He was also MD and CEO of a leading German OEM. So welcome to ETAuto, Mr. Wilfried Aulbur. We are happy to host you here today. Over to you, Mr. Aulbur.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I apologize for the delay. I think the COVID crisis also has an impact on communication. Again, my apologies for having you wait for 10, 12 minutes. What I want to do today is start out with a disclaimer. The events are very much unfolding as we speak. If we look around the world, what we see is a lot of dynamic developments in various economies driven by the progression of the disease as well as the actions of various governments. So all the numbers that I'm presenting today are numbers that you have to see under that caveat, and you will see updates from our side as far as economic projections are concerned as we move along and as we go through this unprecedented pandemic. If we move to page number 2, these numbers are not really that important. I think what is important is that COVID indeed is a global problem. I think that the challenges that COVID has brought about in Europe, in the United States, and in many of the emerging markets are very, very severe. And clearly, this is something that is far from over. We are basically still at the beginning of this crisis, depending a little bit on where you are. The only country that's probably over the hump at this point is the country where everything started, and that is China. If we move to page number 3, the intensity of the global economic disruption depends on when and how long different regions will take measures to contain the disease. And what you'll see over here is just a very schematic graph that shows that China probably is over the hump, has at least gone through the first wave. Hopefully there won't be a second one. The European Union is relatively close to reaching a plateau, right? So we do believe that at some point we'll see certain reductions in the number of new infections, hopefully also in the number of people that die due to this disease as we move through the high point of this disease and infection in Spain, in Italy, and other places. The US is behind. It's seeing quite some challenges as we speak in New York and other parts of the United States. And India has just started in the sense that the first measures are on the ground. The lockout is on the ground. But there is probably a large chance that this disease is going to get momentum and further momentum in India as we move through the next weeks and potentially months. Moving to page number 4, what does this mean for GDP? And I'll come to India in a little bit, but for GDP, what it basically means is that compared to a world pre-COVID, where there was a reasonable amount of growth around the world, where global growth would have been around 3.3%, we do see a significant reduction. If we take into account 4 weeks of economic disruption, this is one scenario, we probably would see about a 1.3% reduction in global growth. We would see China still growing at about 4%, which would be the lowest in decades. And we would see about a 2.5% reduction in the European Union and in the United States. Now, if we are forced to extend lockdowns and basically drive this for a period of 12 weeks, and mind you, in the US, at least in big parts of the US, we already under a 7-week lockdown, then that would have a dramatically larger impact on economies, and in particular in the European Union as well as the US. We would see a GDP contraction by about 5%, which is a real massive negative hit to the economic growth of these countries. And globally, this would mean that we are actually seeing a shrinking economy by -2%. We move to page number 5. The unfortunate thing for the automotive industry is that the automotive industry went into this crisis already under duress. We've seen what we call a perfect storm happening in the automotive industry. We have had the diesel issue. We have large investments in electrification, in autonomy, in connected vehicles. We're seeing a change in business models moving away from vehicle ownership to shared concepts. We still have to evaluate the impact of the crisis on these kind of shared concepts. We are seeing stagnating markets in many parts of the world, actually declining markets after an unprecedented expansion. And that cocktail of negative influences really sort of has driven the automotive industry already into a situation where it was under duress and was under stress. And now on top of this, we are adding a disruption that is massive. And this disruption is a disruption that's both happening on the supply side as well as the demand side. On the supply side, the fact that within automotive, we have built highly integrated global supply chains that are extremely efficient actually once more shows that these supply chains, while efficient, also are very, very vulnerable to global shocks. We've seen this in the past with Fukushima and other activities, but this time, again, we are hit, and we are hit quite hard. On the demand side, clearly we have consumers that are shaken, right? Typically, car purchases go down in terms of, or during times when the overall economy is not doing that well. There may be some niches that are not quite as affected. Typically, what you see is that, for example, luxury purchases may still happen because that segment of society is really not that vulnerable to economic shocks. But here, what is happening is we don't really have an economic shock as such. We have a medical shock. And this medical shock applies to everybody, right? Everybody can get sick. Everybody can potentially also pass away because of this virus. And as a consequence, there's a significant reduction in willingness to buy. There's a significant uncertainty in consumers. And clearly, if you're under lockdown, you don't even have an opportunity to really go see a car and then finally end up buying that vehicle, right? The second point that's important to mention is that obviously the overall industry and also the profit pool of the overall industry depends heavily on Chinese demand, and Chinese demand already has been hit. So the risk for the automotive industry from a supply chain, and from the supply side and the demand side is extremely high. There are other industries such as mechanical engineering and logistics that are also extremely hit. And I think the only thing one has to do is talk to, for example, carriers that are transporting containers from China to the West to get a feeling for how massive this impact has been. Moving forward on page number 6, this is just a rough indication of what we are talking about in terms of scenarios. And it's important to talk about scenarios over here because at the end of the day, nobody really knows what exactly is going to happen. Now, typically the scenarios that people have talked about were V-shape, where I just go down and then I go up very quickly and it's business as usual as we move ahead. This scenario has become unlikely, and I think this is unlikely globally. It's not something, while everybody would like to see it, it's not something that we believe is going to happen. The second is the U-shaped scenario, where we have a significant decline in sales. When this happens depends on the regions. Say in Q1 2020 through the beginning of Q3 2020, before we ramp up gradually and see that demand is coming back in the automotive industry. And the L shape basically means you take the U shape and just prolong the bottom of this shape, meaning the time for you to come back to full production, to come back into something that's normal, is going to extend even further, and we'll see an incomplete recovery in 2021, full recovery then potentially, again, depending on the region, in 2022. So these are the scenarios that we're dealing with, that we're working with, and these scenarios obviously have different avatars for India, for China, for the EU and the US, but the regional impact, especially of the U and L-shaped scenarios, are quite significant. And we're seeing this. If we look at the situation of migrant workers in India, if we look at the unemployment rates in the United States that have gone up by 10 million already in the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, there is a significant economic disruption that's happening in the overall automotive industry. Now, moving on to the next page, this is just a quick view on what's happening in the United States. Again, this data is of March 20th. I haven't updated all the slides because the development is so volatile and so dynamic. But I think what's important over here is to recognize that even at that point in time, about two and a half weeks ago, more than 100 OEMs and engine plants across North America had ceased production. This is massive, right? We are seeing a large part of the overall production capacity being idled, with corresponding impacts on employment and obviously down the line on the supply chain. And even as China is ramping up again and saying, okay, listen, we can produce again and we are happy to ship goods to the United States. The United States is saying, listen, we really don't need them at this point in time because our plants are shut. Moving on to the next state, just a quick indication of what does this mean for some of the volumes in these markets. And the example over here is the Class 8, meaning the heavy duty trucks that typically are strongly correlated to GDP in terms of sales. Last year's production was around 330,000 units. And what we're seeing in terms of current projections is that full year production will go down to around 150,000 units. And that simply means that we're seeing a dramatic decrease in commercial vehicle production in the country, right? And we see de facto production being below replacement demand. Whether this 140, 150,000 is the right unit or the right number will remain to be seen. But I think all of us agree that the contraction in the commercial vehicle market is going to be dramatic. Moving on to the next slide, I don't want to go into the details on the left-hand side. I just want to send a couple of messages. If we look at the production capacity and plant closures, the dark red is always OEM, the top 10 OEMs, and the orange color that you see is the top 30 suppliers. We see that 100% of the plants of the top 10 OEMs are closed in the United States. Half of the plants of the suppliers are closed. And clearly, if the OEMs are not working at some point, the suppliers won't have anything to do. We're seeing, and this is basically a slide that we've done last week, we're seeing that there is a reduction in indirect staff. It's more pronounced in the supply base than at the OEs. The suppliers are typically faster to react on these kind of swings than the OEMs. We're seeing that there is an excessive drawing of credit lines in the OEMs as well as the suppliers. People are pulling money because they need money. And the question that all of them are facing, and we'll come back to that later, is really how do we make sure that we survive and have the liquidity to tide over this challenge. There are some initial permanent layoffs that are happening. There's been a significant number of credit rating downgrades that has happened, and clearly companies are also suspending or canceling dividends, because in this kind of environment you need cash. You cannot afford to pay it out to investors. Moving to page number 10, you see a very similar environment in Europe. Again, economic activity has been put on hold, and I think the reason is quite clear. We've had a dramatic loss of life in Italy, in Spain, in France, and this de facto needs reaction from governments, and the reaction has been trying to slow down the spread of the disease by lockdowns. If we move to page number 11, now here we'll just look at the light vehicle sales just to sort of provide a perspective on two different markets. Heavy duty in the United States, and now the light duty in Europe. What we're seeing is really effects along supply, demand, and innovation, right? The immediate effect on supply is the OEM shutdowns and the global supply chain disruptions. We've talked about it, it's really severe. Second is we have demand challenges. Shelter-in-place restrictions are there, consumer confidence is low, and I have to sell off my inventory, right? And last but not least, in the mid to long term, we will also see an impact on innovation. Companies will have to ask themselves very, very hard questions. They will have to look at their overall innovation portfolios and really ask, what do I do? What do I not do? Where do I outsource? So this environment is also an opportunity for suppliers, as companies, as OEMs will have to look at technology partners to basically shoulder the burden that this crisis is putting on all of us, right? So we will see delayed product cycles, we will see delayed investments, and we will also see a fair amount of financial distress. And I come back to financial distress a little bit later, because clearly this is not only a challenge, it's also an opportunity for companies that have solid balance sheets, or something that Wall Street in the past would characterize as lazy balance sheets. What are some of the questions? The question is, for example, for OEMs, when can we start producing vehicles again? Right? When will we have a functioning supply chain again? When will we have normal consumer demand again? And what can we do? And what are the trigger effects to relook at our product pipeline and maybe reanimate some of the efforts that we put to sleep during the crisis? Looking at the overall demand in Europe in the light vehicle space, even in the V-shaped scenario, we see a 12 to 18% contraction, and that is massive. If we look at the U-shaped scenario, contraction is going to be 18 to 25% and 30 to 38% in the L-shaped scenario. So the contraction in the European light vehicle market is going to be massive. Obviously, you'll see similar numbers in commercial vehicles in off-highway. And what that means for Indian suppliers who have a fair share of exports to either Europe or the United States, you will be under pressure. Right? There is no doubt about it. This fact is real. And these kind of contractions are unlikely to be eliminated in 2021. There may be lingering effects going into 2021. Now let's shift gears and focus on India on page number 12. FY 2020 was already a tough year for the Indian economy because we had the NPA crisis and we had very weak domestic consumption, and that basically led to a slowdown in GDP that's been very marked. If you see, or if you have a look at this graph, what you see is de facto a multi-year degradation in economic growth. Right? We are in a difficult environment. And also, we haven't really been able to leverage the opportunities that the US-China trade war drove. Production has not moved to India during the trade war, but it moved to Thailand, it moved to Vietnam. So there's been a significant opportunity that's been not really leveraged to the full advantage of the country. What were some of the factors behind the slowdown in India? It's definitely the commercial credits, weak domestic demand, volatile fuel prices, and de facto a very uncertain economic sentiment, let's put it this way. And then the global slowdown that's basically done its part to make growth in India difficult. But what we've seen previously for the automotive industry globally is also true in the case of India. The crisis hits at a time when we are already in a very challenging situation. We move to page number 13. What does this now mean in terms of the auto sector? The auto sector already contracted significantly in FY 2020, and overall we expect about an 18% drop in overall automotive sales. Right? As you can see, Q4 in FY 2020 has been particularly bad, but even the quarters before were really not that encouraging. We basically contracted by 12%, 22%, and 13% in Q1, Q2, Q3. And then we had a dramatic, steep decline of 27% in Q4. Right? The reasons are weak consumer sentiments, private consumption, and cross savings as percent of GDP have decreased substantially, and that is worrisome because that simply means that people just don't have money. Right? It's not only that they don't decide to invest in vehicles, they're not able to put it back in savings either, and that clearly is also an indication that the future may not be as positive as we would like. We've seen volatility in rural demand based on the lack of credit availability and regulatory uncertainties, and rural is important for India. And if you remember how many OEMs have built up their distribution networks in rural areas to really leverage that demand, unlock that demand, clearly if that isn't doing well, it has an impact on two-wheeler sales, but also on vehicle sales, on passenger vehicle sales. We've had the credit shortage from the NBFC crisis. We have the hike in insurance costs. We have a slowdown in urban areas due to infra constraints. The revised Excel norms and GST implementations have impacted commercial vehicle sales. And the BS6 introduction leads to a postponement of purchases in FY21 to FY21. And then on top of this, we've added COVID. So we already had a very challenging situation, and we're now hit with this crisis. Moving on to page number 14, what we can see over here is there had been a period of a certain sort of recovery. We're looking at two-wheelers, passenger vehicles, and commercial vehicles in these three graphs. And the overall gap towards previous year had started to decline. In the case of passenger vehicles, at least we had a few months where sales were on par with FY19. And then finally, after this period of recovery, after a difficult sort of first half roughly of the year, we are getting into the COVID-19 environment that again leads to a dramatic sales drop and to complete production shutdown since March 21st. Moving forward, what does this mean? I mean, it basically means that, again, we have, like we discussed earlier, supply side effects and we have demand side effects. On the supply side, we have real challenges on, in particular, two accounts. One is the BS4 inventory. This is now my personal opinion, an act of God, right? This is something that industry cannot control, and I don't think that industry can be burdened with BS4 inventory, right? The Supreme Court currently is allowing nationwide, I think about 10% of the BS4 inventory, sales of 10% of the BS4 inventory in the first 10 days after deconfinement. This is not going to be sufficient. We need to be able to take these vehicles and sell them into the market. Companies will not be able to handle this kind of inventory or to handle these kind of write-offs. It's not going to be possible. The second question is a question about who needs money the most at the end of the day. And there's a question between the large companies and the smaller companies. And this is a difficult trade-off. I'll come up and talk about cash in a little bit. But clearly, one of the challenges that we have is to see who is well capitalized, who can support suppliers going forward, and how do we get this done? This is a question that's not only there in India, it's actually a question around the globe, right? Typically, it's the larger companies that have balance sheets that can support some amount of paying for some time. And typically what we also see is that governments are trying to help, in particular, small and medium companies, medium-sized companies, to come over and survive this sort of challenge, to live through the crisis, because at the end of the day, they drive a bulk of the employment, but also even for large companies, governments will be forced to step in, provide liquidity so that they can pay for suppliers. So a very, very unique, difficult environment, because this is an environment that doesn't hit only one country, sort of some debt crisis in Argentina or something. This is actually a global phenomenon and hits India at a time when basically tax revenues are falling and the financial possibilities of the country and the government may be somewhat constrained. So difficult environment to find the balance between making sure that everybody in the supply chain survives. Page number 16 just shows some of the production shutdowns by OEMs and by suppliers. And as you see, we have Maruti Suzuki, Minda, Hyundai Motor, Bosch, Mahindra, Hero, Tata, Volvo Eicher, Bharat Forge, TVS, all suspending operations because everybody realizes we're not going to be able to sell our product. There simply is no market. That market has evaporated. And obviously, we have to be in compliance with the guidance from the government. So shutdowns happen. Now, this is a challenge for employees. This is actually particularly a challenge as this effect trickles down the supply chain, because the further you go down to the supply chain, the more vulnerable employees become. Moving down to page number 17. This is now on the demand side, right? On the demand side, we've already seen an environment in which the Indian consumer is getting more careful. Now, a combination of weak income growth, consumer sentiment that's not that positive, and credit slowdown can potentially drag down growth even if lockdowns are lifted. We have just delivered a major shock to the system, right? Funding healthcare costs in India, especially for the lower rungs of society, is a very existential problem and often leads to very existential crisis, right? And this will definitely be something that sort of goes across or creates an environment in which consumers may just not be as open to consume and may be much more focused on trying to build or rebuild a safety net to weather the next crisis, right? And clearly, this is something that is going to be difficult to deal with. It is something that will require government action, and it is something that is potentially shaking the Indian psyche for some time, so that consumption doesn't come back as quickly as we would like it to come back, as we would like to see that. If we move to page number 18, and again, I'd like to stress that these are really numbers that are basically indicative numbers. We have a U-shape and L-shape scenario for India, what we see is in the U-shaped scenario, a contraction in FY21 by about 5% in two-wheelers, 4% in passenger cars, and 5% in commercial vehicles. So a significant contraction on an already low base. The L-shaped scenario is much more dramatic. It's about 20% in two-wheelers, 14% in passenger vehicles, and 17% in commercial vehicles. So a significant reduction in consumption and economic activity. Nobody knows the future. Nobody has the answers, but that's the environment in which we live. And obviously, it's important as a company, as an executive, to think in scenarios and try to prepare yourself for the future. Now, in terms of the questions that executives face today, we have a number of decisions that need to be made around plant production levels, inventory build-up, supply chain ramp-up, employee policies and benefits, headcount, capital expenditure, long-term investments, cash management, and capitalization. And we have a ton of questions where we really don't necessarily know the answer to, meaning how effective will the current measures be at limiting the spread of COVID? Will people be safe to working close again? When will this happen? Hopefully it will happen. What are the trigger points that tell us, green light, we can move forward and the country is again open for business? What is the overall impact on vehicle sales? What support can we get from the government? And when will the market recover? So these are all questions that are important, but nobody really has the answer. There's a lot of uncertainty in the system. And this basically then leads to page number 20. And I just spent about 10 minutes talking about what needs to be done. Two things are important. The world is more volatile than it used to be. And I think Indians know extremely well how to handle volatility, but this is pretty much unprecedented. So we have to think in terms of scenarios. And the second thing is we really have to think about the financial position that we have vis-a-vis competitors. Do we have a solid balance sheet or not a solid balance sheet? And what does this mean in terms of actions around our strategic decisions that we need to take going forward? Page number 21 just shows the various scenarios. We talked about those earlier. And page number 22 is important because when we talk about the balance sheet, if I am lucky and I basically got beaten down by Wall Street for the longest period of time because I've been conservative and I've conserved cash and I had a lazy balance sheet, today is my day. Because now I have an opportunity in the market as companies are basically coming to market on the market cheap. I can really look at opportunities in M&A. What are the kind of companies that potentially make sense for me? What are the kind of companies that I can take over and restructure? And can I potentially look at consolidating or driving the consolidation in my industry? And can I look at buying assets that either from an employee perspective or technology perspective or market access perspective make sense? Now, if my balance sheet is not that good, I really have to look at what is my overall setup, which investments make sense, and where do I need to reduce exposure. Moving on to page number 23 and then to 24. What are the key priorities that we have in this environment? The key priorities are for us, as far as we can see, 6. One is we need to ensure the health of staff and identify vulnerabilities. That needs to happen today. And again, I think that many of the Indian companies, whether it's a Mahindra or a Wipro, are very much aware of their responsibilities towards India and have taken some extraordinary steps in order to support the country and make sure that money is available, as well as ventilators and masks and all that will hopefully be available in sufficient numbers. So that's something that comes with the DNA of operating in India, being an Indian company. The second is we need to worry about ramp down or shutdown of operations, which is happening. We need to deploy short-term liquidity measures. If possible, we need to access funding and government aid. And then we need to start preparing for an efficient restart after the crisis. And this restart will depend on the various scenarios that you are working on. And last but not least, we have an opportunity to really emerge stronger by improving performance and capitalizing on strategic opportunities. This is the M&A angle that I talked about earlier. And clearly, if you see these 6 work streams, they're quite complicated and will need support through a crisis support or response center, meaning a control room. Let me just move on to page number 25. One of the things that we need to do is we really need to drive fast actions to ensure that our workforce is healthy and that we do our part to prevent and delay the spread of COVID-19 in the company and in the country. Some of my customers and clients have lost members of their teams due to COVID-19, and that's a very unfortunate situation to be in. We need to drive actions that safeguard the operational core of the business, upstream and downstream. I need to worry about who are my critical suppliers, how do I make sure they survive, and at the same time, if I look at the dealer network, how can I work with my dealers to make sure that they are able to tide over the situation. I need to look at how can I keep core administrative functions running, and I need to have a targeted and professional crisis communication. Today is the day when you want to talk to your employees, you need to talk to your suppliers, you need to talk to your dealers. Nobody knows the answer, but everybody appreciates that you will engage to try to provide as much direction and as much exchange as possible. Moving on to page 26, we'll have, or we would strongly suggest to put a dedicated hibernation task force in place where we look at the ramp down of operations and an efficient process handling during hibernation. And clearly, you have critical questions such as how much do I shut down in terms of my industrial operations? What do I do with engineering and administrative functions? How do I handle the suppliers, the customers, and my operations during hibernation? And then you have de facto checklists that you go through in order to make sure that you cover all the angles of this process. I don't want to go into the details of the various factors on the slide. I'll have the contact information of the team in India as well as myself later on, and we are more than happy to answer any questions should they come. Second, or the third point is the cash office. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aulbur, for such cogent analysis of the situation that we have at hand right now. And you have rightly said that we cannot think about the future, because right now, if you look at the future, only certain thing is unceasing uncertainty that is there. So, but whatever the best we could provide, looking at the data, the information that we get from around the world that you have put. Let's take some of the questions from our attendees. The first question comes from Mr. Dinesh Kumar. He wants to understand, his question is, what is the total impact of COVID-19 in the world? Already auto sector has been on the downside for the past 2 years. Your answer, Mr. Aulbur.
I think the total impact is still difficult to assess because this is an unfolding situation. If we look at the United States, the measures are in place till April 30th. My personal assumption is that they will go beyond April 30th and will have to go beyond April 30th because we see a high number of infections and also a high number of potential fatalities in the US. So it's,
okay.
I mean, 800 billion currently, but this, I mean, it's a, as we said, a dramatic reduction of 20-30% of the overall value add of the automotive industry.
So the next question comes from Sudeep Patil and Roshan. She wants to understand, what would you like to ask? He wants to understand from you, what initiatives are being suggested by the industry to the government for reducing the adverse impact of COVID, and how can we improve the situation from government help?
I think that very much depends on the countries. If you look at Germany as an example, I think the German approach has been multi-pronged. One is that 450,000 companies in Germany have applied for short work. Short work means that the workers stay at home. 20% of their salary is paid by the company, 40% is paid by the government, and 40% is a salary cut. So you keep your job, you don't work, but at least you have 60% of the funds that you previously had available. And then there is financial support for small and medium companies, plus potentially the government is considering taking a stake in large companies if they need a financial bailout, selling that stake later on, and then ensuring that taxpayers don't get shortchanged. In India's environment, I think one needs to find a way to make sure that marginal workers are taken care of, that they have food to eat. I think that's honestly the biggest challenge right now, because a lot of the migrant labor, as you know, needs to or is trying to get back to their villages because food over there is cheaper and they just cannot afford to live in the large centers where they used to work anymore. So I think that's an immediate concern. And then obviously the government hopefully has the financial means and wherewithal to support small and medium enterprises as well as larger enterprises with liquidity.
So next question comes from Mr. Anand Kumar. It looks a bit difficult to answer this. He asks, what would be the timeline of recovery looking at the current trend of infection in the US?
I honestly cannot tell you because I'm not an epidemiologist. But again, my gut feeling is that we're not going to be out of this by April 30th. I think this will take at least another 4 weeks, which means that we would have at least a partial lockdown for close to 3 months, right? And that's quite substantial. I think that industry obviously is worried about this. Everybody at the end of the day is being impacted, but it's a trade-off and a difficult trade-off that needs to be taken to avoid the spread of the disease without killing the economy to a point where it's extremely difficult to restart.
So we have, we'll take some repeat questions are also coming, but we'll take only after others' question is answered. So my next question is from Pratish Singh. How did it impact the overall productivity of Indian automotive market, both manufacturing and aftermarket?
I'm not 100% sure if I understand that question correctly. I mean, I think the reduction in revenue and profit is obviously hitting the industry. In terms of productivity, clearly, I mean, plants that are running at 100% capacity or close to 100% capacity are the most productive. In terms of, if the question is around international competitiveness, I think India has struggled to maintain its position in the global automotive industry. We've seen a lot of challenging news coming out of India over the last few years, driven by credit availability, driven by consumer sentiment, and all of which resulted in reduced volumes. So that's led to a situation where I think many people have potentially reduced focus on the market. If you're looking at foreign direct investment, you've had a few companies pulling out of the market. So from that perspective, I think we need to really see how can we support the industry and make sure that it remains a strong pillar of the overall GDP in India.
Next question comes from Suyash. He asked, what will be the impact of skilled labor in automotive industry? Impact on skilled labor.
So impact on skilled labor, again, I mean, depends on what, obviously you will see a dramatic reduction. The safety nets in India are not as robust as in some other countries. And I think we're already seeing that people are undergoing hardship, right? Now, what happens to skilled labor generally depends on the speed at which we can go into recovery and basically come back to volumes that are adequate, right? I mean, we've had this discussion for a very long time with the government as well what you need to do is create demand, because demand drives employment. And I think that's the biggest challenge. How do we create an environment in which Indian consumers are able to invest in white goods, in automotive, and as a consequence drive recovery that ensures employment for skilled labor.
So as we are running out of time, we'll take only a few more questions. So next question I'm taking from Wilfried. Since China has recovered from COVID-19 and becoming normal, how it will impact the global economy? Any positive sign you see there?
See, the Chinese economy has pivoted from being a purely export-oriented economy to being a more internal consumption-oriented economy. And the Chinese have an advantage in the sense that there's lots of money that they can throw at problems and build buildings where nobody will sort of live in. That will drive employment, and people will go to work and they will make some money. I'm not in detail in these kind of initiatives to say whether or not this creates long-term competitiveness for the country. And one also has to see what is going to happen going forward. Is this phase number one? I mean, the markets that are at the origin of this crisis have opened up again without a changed sort of way to operate these markets. I think we're going to have another crisis and another pandemic coming our way in the future. I mean, we had SARS, now we have this. Without fixing the root cause, we're going to see other disruptions. And I think that's where we stand.
Next question comes from Bharat Dhruv. He asked, what is going to be the future of ancillary suppliers who are tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers? How do you see this?
No, it depends on the balance sheet of the suppliers. The challenge that you have is if your balance sheet is weak and you're already over leveraged, you are in deep trouble, right? I mean, you may not survive this crisis. The suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and especially, I mean, I'm just going to take tier 1 as an example. If you have a good balance sheet, this will allow you to take more value addition over from OEMs or to consolidate your industry and buy other tier 1s or tier 2s that fit your portfolio, fit your customer sort of profile. And you can then come out of this crisis much stronger than before. So you basically need to do your target screening today, and you need to see how you ensure access to capital to be able to execute some of these moves. So, I mean, you never should waste a good crisis. So this crisis gives you two opportunities. One is to make sure that you become more efficient as an organization. I think there's no way around driving out cost out of the system. So that's one of the focus areas that you need to have. And the second is really on the strategic side. What can I do to buy access and buy maybe IP, people, and yeah.
So next question, it is a very interesting question coming from Abhinav Verma. He wants to understand how will the COVID-19 situation impact the shared mobility platforms, and do you think it will encourage more people to join to buy new cars? How will it impact the cab aggregators and other segment, shared mobility segment, and do you think it will also bring spike in personal vehicle buying?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's a good question, and I think will cabs and will Uber and Lyft and Ola and all those companies survive? I think they obviously have seen a dramatic challenge as far as the operation is concerned, because nobody wants to go in those vehicles at this particular point in time anymore. Is that going to come back? I would think it's going to come back, but I think that the overall concern around having your own vehicle and having your own private space for mobility would be a valid concern, but that in India has two limitations. One is obviously depending on the amount of money that you earn, you may or may not be able to afford vehicles, right? And the second limitation is obviously the limitation of infrastructure. So what I could see is, yeah, please go ahead.
Next question, we are running out of time. One last question that we are going to take is from Pradeep Nair. He wants to understand, looking at the double impact that is going to be on Indian market, that is COVID plus BS6 transition, how do you see the two-wheeler industry, revive or pan out in future?
I think the question is all around consumer confidence, right? How do we create an environment where people have access to cheap loans? And I think that's always been a driver of vehicle consumption in India. How do I create an environment that is stable, where I focus on taking the right measures to support the economy and support employment? That's going to be extremely important for the country going forward. That's not going to be easy. India is a large country with a very diverse background, very diverse cultures, but it is what is needed to be able to come back to sales numbers that are reasonable. Right? Again, I honestly, if I could predict the future, I would probably, play the markets right now. I really honestly don't know. But I do know that we have, over the last few years in India, eroded economic confidence or confidence in the economy, which is now exacerbated by the impact of COVID. That needs to be turned around. We need a policy regime that drives, on the one hand, consumption, and on the other hand, stability for companies so that they are confident to invest.
So let's close the Q&A session, but before closing, there's one question from Meghna, and it's the best question to close the Q&A session. Is there any positive viewpoint that you see amid this all COVID-19 situation? Just a brief answer to this.
Yeah, I think the COVID-19 situation is not the end of the world, right? It's not that we'll all sort of stop doing everything. There will be a turnaround. It's a question of when will it happen. But I think it teaches us a few lessons. It teaches us to, be careful as far as the balance between debt and a solid balance sheet is concerned. It teaches us probably the need for global coordinated action against practices that can drive this kind of disruption and dramatic damage to the global economy, right? But overall, I think obviously India as an economy is going to survive and hopefully provides the needed background for a government to take some decisive steps to enable both consumption as well as an environment that is conducive for investment. I think that's, for me, a potential upside. And again, we're talking about a couple of years. We've been in other crises before. This is not the first one. It is a very severe one, but obviously the world is not going to end, and we're all going to continue to build cars and sell two-wheelers and all that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aulbur, for joining us, and we sincerely apologize for the technical glitch due to which we had to delay the broadcast of the webinar. We are extremely sorry for this. And we want to announce that the recording of this webinar shall be available on ETAuto Facebook page and also on ETAuto YouTube page tomorrow 3 p.m. IST. And those we understand the situation right now of the COVID-19 situation, and as the ETAuto leading media and knowledge platform, we will try to contribute to the industry and we will try to do our bit. In this series, we are going to bring tomorrow yet another webinar at 5 p.m. Please join us. We have experts, Mr. David Sanders, Global Advanced Manufacturing and Mobility Advisor from EY. He'll be joining us from the US. We also have top CEOs from the OEM. They are also going to discuss on the key areas like workforce management, employee management, consumer and brand protection, short-term finance management, supply chain management, and legal contract dispute resolution. Thank you so much for tuning into ETAuto webinar. See you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Thank you so much, Mr. Aulbur, and everybody who has joined the webinar today. Thank you so much.
From my side also, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Apologize for the initial delayed start. And if anybody has questions, Som, Imran, and myself are more than happy to react, and our contact information is in the PDF. So I hope that you can see that on the ET website. If not, please, you can contact us via the Roland Berger website as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.